All right. Well, welcome to the March meeting of the Nevada County Camera Club. I'm Mike Shea. You elected me president, whether you know it or not. Um, so I've got a few announcements I want to make, and then I'll open it up to announcements from the floor. One, if you haven't seen the Granucci Gallery exhibit at the Center for the Arts, make sure you get on over there to check it out, because we really have a wonderful exhibit out there. And I met the other night the guy that owns the Morrison Gallery. So this is a pretty much world famous gallery of musician pictures, the Rolling Stones, David Bowie, all these big named artists. And he said that he had gone to our exhibit and he was impressed. So, I mean, if a gallery owner of that ilk is impressed by our stuff, that's a really nice commendation. And I'd like to thank the folks that put that exhibit on, which is Rachel Rosenthal, Ellen Davis, and Ann Westling. So I think the only one here is Rachel. But yeah, they did a fabulous job of putting that thing together. And also, our Gold Country On Camera Challenge crew, I'd like to recognize them, which is Laura Greenman, Dave McClellan, Barbara Summers, Kathy Trujillo, Ann Westling, and Ellen Davis again. So that's coming right up, and I think Kathy's going to say a few words about it, so you'll hear a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I also wanted to thank our tech crew, David Wong, George Papel, and Craig Rorson. And these guys were here the first day of the big snowstorm. The snow's coming down, and they're here trying to make sure that we can, get the Zoom going and get everything working together. And tonight we'll
They're not over on both sides.
Yeah. But thank you guys. I mean, yeah, it was kind of scary. I mean, the snow's coming down, and Craig's sitting there without, in shirt sleeves like that. Yeah, and it was really something. So I would like to, we're going to redo the bylaws for the club because we would like the club to become incorporated. And to do that, we've got to make some changes to the bylaws. The current bylaws state that you all have to have a copy of the revisions 1 month before we vote on them. So my intention is to send them out to you before the April meeting, and then you would have a month to review them. And then we will vote in May on whether to revise the bylaws, and I would hope you would do that. I would like to open it up to announcements from the floor. So anybody that has one, I would ask that you kind of come down this aisle because we've got a lot of gear sitting over there. Douglas?
Hi, I'm Douglas Hooper. I'm associated with Nevada County Media, and they've got a really great facility that's very close to here. It's just right up around the corner on Centennial Circle. And they've got a great photo studio that's waiting to be used. They have memberships available. They're $125 a year normally, and they're having a sale right now for $75 a year. So it's a great resource. It's close by. See me if you would like more information.
Hi, everybody. Kathy Triolo here. I have 3 things. Do you want me to go ahead and do membership? Yeah. Okay, I'll do membership while I'm up here. I'm replacing Barbara just for tonight. She came back with a cold. Aw, but yeah, exactly. But I didn't get it. Yay. Yay. Oh, good. You're doing good. Okay. So anyway, she will be back. She's going to get better. But meanwhile, I agreed to help her out with the membership table. And I will get to that in just 1 minute because I want to tell you a couple other things. One is that Gold Country on Camera is having we are having our gala Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. at Grass Valley Courtyard Suites. And everyone is invited. The public is invited. Members are invited. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Judging will be Saturday afternoon. We have 2 judges who are former members of our club, Margie Detterman and Ed Rotberg. And so when you come on Saturday night at 6, you'll get to see who won all the fabulous prizes. What are they? I have no idea. We'll find out on Saturday. So please come. I think you're going to be really impressed with some of the artwork that we have displayed there. Every year we push the envelope a little more. So that's one thing. Number two, Mike asked me to talk to you about the group chat. I don't know if you know this, many of us are new to this, but we do have a Google group chat. And if you're interested in getting on it, I'd say I do have the URL if you want to copy it during the break. However, the easiest way is just to send me an email and I'll get you on. Just say, I want to be on group chat. There is a link on our website, however, it is wrong. So we're going to be updating that. So just flash me an email and I'll sign you up for group chat. Thank you, Henry. I was just going to say that and you helped me here. So it's a social group chat. That means we get to share educational opportunities. We get to talk about calls for art. If you want to sell something like a camera or equipment, you can sell it on there. Or you can pose a question. You could say, who knows how to do this? So it's all, it's opt-in, which means that not everybody automatically in the club gets on our group chat. You have to ask to be let in. And it's not to be used for, promoting your own, something outside the club, let's say. You can put on there that, hey, this is my group and this is what I do. And if you're interested, contact me. That's just fine. But keep it short, simple, sweet. So that's the group chat. Does that answer your question? All right, good. Any questions about that? No. Okay, good. So the third personal thing is that after much dithering, Bill Wages and I are definitely going to go ahead and do the Bodie field trip in the fall. We don't have an exact date yet, and we don't have the exact cost. So we are going to, now that Bill's gallery is up and running and doing so well, I can pin him down, and we're going to sit down and we're going to figure out all the details and get it out to the group here. I think the maximum we can take will be about 10, although we might be able to stretch it a little more. And that would be one day going into all the buildings that the public is not allowed in. And we're one morning, and it would be one evening after closing time till midnight. So some opportunities that we don't normally get. So we will be getting more information out about that. But if you think you want to do it, it's probably going to be in September. So check your calendar. All right, membership. Want to welcome any guests tonight. If you're a guest, could you just wave your hand and people can look around? Look at this. Wow, welcome everyone. So nice to see you here. Hope you enjoy the evening. And I'd like to welcome our new members from last time. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 new members. Yay. So let me list them off. If you are here, please just say hi and give us just a 1-minute hello about yourself. Linda Hardenberg, are you here? Yeah. Teresa Williams, are you here? Okay, these people love us, I'm sure. Beckett Kernmont, I love his name. Jason, I know you're here, I saw you. Come on, if you could just stand up and tell everybody what kind of photography you like to do. Oh, that's okay. So just as an aside, Jason was one of the photographers who worked the Wild and Scenic Film Festival this year, and a lot of his photos are being featured on their website. He did an amazing job. Casey Garoto. Okay. Dick Mooney. Dick is a former member. He might be on Zoom. Hi, Dick, if you are. Jerry Batson. Okay, some of these people might be on Zoom. Maurice Freeman. Yay, hi, Maurice. Would you mind standing up and giving us a 1 minute? Well, that's great. Welcome. You're in great company here. I'm sure you're going to make lots of friends. All right. Stephen Caldwell. Hi, Stephen. Well, welcome. We also have another former crime scene photographer here. He, he worked for the Yuba County for many years. His name's Cal. Yeah. Well, then we'll make sure you meet him at some point. I don't see him here tonight. And last but not least, Natalia Comenato. I love that name too. No, Natalia, you're not here. All right. Well, then hopefully we'll get to see him in person at another meeting. And back to you, Mike. Thank you.
I didn't trip. So hi, I'm Rachel Rosenthal, and I just wanted to give a little more details on Photography Month. We've been planning on it for months and months, and April 1st is just coming up this week. So thank you to Mike, and good to hear the good feedback from the fellow who was at Friday's opening reception. I'm sorry I missed him. But the Granucci is up, as he said, it runs through April 15th. Next up for the Granucci is a panel discussion, which is new this year. So we have Mike Shea, Ellen Davis and Robert Arnold are going to host a panel discussion. I will be the moderator, and that's on Wednesday, April 5th, 5 to 7 at the Granucci Gallery. And so I'm going to be asking questions to prompt them to share with us what are their techniques and thoughts about creating a spectacular black and white image. So please join us at the Granucci on April 5th. Also, just for the Photography Month committee as a whole, yes, Mike mentioned several of the people, but there's a whole team of people. So it's myself and Ellen and Anne. It's also Kathy Triolo, Donna Lebro, and Ray Lerke. So there's a whole crew of people making all these events happen. So we have the Granucci. We have the reception on Friday for Not on Solid Ground, which was a fabulous exhibition at Nevada City Winery. Dick Mooney's at Edward Jones currently, and then Gold Country on Camera opens April 1st at the Courtyard Suites. And then we have photo walks, which Ray Lerke is leading. Those are on April 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. There's information on the club's webpage as to where to meet. And it's for the public, club members and the public. So if you'd like to just stroll along with some of the members of the Camera Club, there's some fascinating images to be had in Grass Valley and Nevada City. So, all right, thank you.
Are there any other announcements? Oh, yeah, David.
Hi, I'm David Wong. That's one thing, I don't know if you're going to talk about it much, but Bill Wages and I are no longer doing the field trips this year, and Mike Oitzman is going to be doing them. I think you're here, aren't you, Mike? I saw you. Oh, coming later. Okay, so he'll be doing the field trips, and one of the field trips that people asked about was going back to the Wild Mustangs up in Nevada. So I'm going to talk with Mike about that, probably May-ish, sometime in that time frame. If you're interested, talk to Mike about that. That was a fun trip that Bill and I did last year, and people wanted to go back to that. And then if anyone wants to go with me and Bill, we're going to Africa at the end of July for 12 days. See me, and we're going to have a lot of fun. I have three more spots for that. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, well, as David said, so David and Bill Wages were our field trip coordinators. And thank you guys for handling that for so long. And we have a new coordinator now, Mike Oitzman, and he would appreciate any suggestions any of you have on places to go. So Mike's going to be here a little bit later, and hopefully before we begin the critiques tonight, he can talk about what he's got planned for a few minutes. What we do need is an exhibition coordinator. So if anybody is interested in taking that job, we'd be more than happy to sign you up. You can see me, call me, email me, whatever you'd like to do to just, but we need somebody to take over the job of doing the club exhibitions. And with that, I think I'm done. And we're going to begin our presentation. So Grace, we've got to do a little coordination here. So excuse me a sec.
Hello? Okay, you guys can hear me? Okay, well, first of all, I would just want to apologize that I can't be there in person. I woke up this morning with a sore throat and it feels like it's turning into a cold. So I didn't want to get anyone else sick. So I am sad that I can't be there, but I'm glad I can be here tonight on Zoom, at least with everyone. And I'm very glad to introduce as our speaker tonight, one of our own club members, Chris Schiller. Now, for those of you who may not already know, Chris has been photographing the American West for more than 35 years, and his work has appeared in scores of solo and group exhibits, including at San Francisco International Airport and alongside works by Ansel Adams. And when Chris first approached me about doing a presentation on how insights from science and painting might help photographers with their own work, I was intrigued because I personally love cross-pollination in art. I love learning from one medium or discipline to help inform our practice of another. And when we talk about art and photography, in both cases, we are fundamentally talking about ways of seeing. And as we learn more about how our eyes and brains make sense of the world, maybe that can help us look at our photos with a fresh perspective as well. So please join me in welcoming Chris as he takes us on a journey toward a deeper understanding of this topic. Thank you.
Sorry? Yes, please. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Schiller. You probably know me through the critiques that I do for the club. Been a club member not that long, probably 4 years now or so. That's okay. Just for a minute. Thank you. Okay, back on my train of thought. I have been a photographer for almost as long as I've been an engineer, and that's been about 35 years, as Grace mentioned. And that balance between doing art and doing science or engineering has gone on my whole adult life. That it also happens with the reading that I do. I read novels and poetry as well as nonfiction that has to do with science. So when I saw this book, Vision and Art, by Margaret Livingstone, I was intrigued and I read it, and it's the perfect balance between science and art. And most of my presentation tonight is based on this book. I think we're ready for the slides. And if we could have the lights down again, please. Beautiful. Thank you, George. And here again is the book. If you're interested in the information, I will show this information again at the end of the presentation during the question and answer period. So no need to take pictures or write anything down now. So tonight, we're going to dive into how human eyes work in terms of color and resolution and talk about some of the implications associated with that. We're going to go through some examples of what I call differential resolution, which is the basis of how we see. We'll talk about another aspect in the science of the eye plus the brain, and that is edge sensitivity. And when I say eye plus brain, what I mean is the eye, your eyes and your brains work together. You can't, if it was possible to just plug into the feed from your eyes, you wouldn't be able to see anything. There's interaction between your eyes and your brain to create what we call vision. So that's why I say eye plus brain. And then we'll dive into some basic methods for improving three-dimensionality in art and photography, and then take it to the next level and talk about advanced three-dimensionality through what I call differential luminosity. I hope you'll enjoy the journey with me. Oh, and please hold questions till the end. Thanks. Anyway, we can get rid of that top bar, George. Otherwise, the slide titles are gonna. There we go. Beautiful. You're a genius. Thank you. So tonight we're going to be talking a lot about luminance. And when I say luminance, what I mean is darkness to lightness, or you can think in terms of brightness. But mostly what I mean is lack of color. So we're only talking about the darkness and the lightness of an image. And we can see this in painting by Picasso. On the left, of course, is full color, and on the right is desaturated. When we talk about bright luminance, we're talking about the whites in the feet and the faces, and the darks are going to be the shadows in the clothing. Seems like a basic concept, but we're talking about it a lot tonight, so I wanted to make sure there's no confusion about it. So let's dive into the science of the eye plus brain. So this is a review for those of you who took biology. There are two kinds of light receptors in our eyes, and we call them rods and cones. The rods are very light sensitive, but they don't see in color. Rods only see in black and white. They can perceive luminance differences, but mostly only in dim light. The other aspect of rods is they're evenly distributed over our retinas, but that even distribution has a low resolution. Cones are our color receptors. We have three kinds of cones, and those cones are concentrated at the center of the retina. And that's what gives us our high resolution vision, are the cones. They're less light sensitive, but in bright light, which is where photography or art viewing happens, the cones dominate. So mostly we're going to be talking about cones. And as you may be aware, the cones have three color sensitivities. I call them bluish, green, and reddish. And the ish part we'll talk about in a minute. And this is referred to as tricolor vision. Humans aren't unique in having tricolor vision, but there's many other creatures that have bicolor vision or unicolor vision or tetracolor vision, et cetera. And we'll talk about that as well. Since we're talking about science, you knew there was going to be graphs, right? So we'll go through this quickly. The top graph, the thing to recognize is that the spectral sensitivity of rods and cones are different. Rods are most sensitive in the blue-green, and cones are most sensitive in the green-yellow. One thing to get from this is that if you've ever done astrophotography or been out at night where you've used a telescope and you've had a red lens or a red LED headlamp, that's what you use to help your nighttime vision. So if you look, if you look at the response of your rods, you can see that in the red, the rods have not much sensitivity. So this is one of the reasons why you can maintain your nighttime vision when you use a red light. You can see the red because some of your cones are seeing the red, but the rods, which are really giving you your low light sensitivity, are not sensitive to red light. In the bottom plots, on the left plot, you can see the three cone colors, the blue, green, and red, with their relative sensitivities. The blue cones are much less sensitive than the green cones, for example, which are more sensitive than the red cones. And if you take the average of those three cones, you can see the average in the right plot. And so with cones being most sensitive to green and yellow light and much less sensitive, for example, to violet or blue light or red light, that leads to the idea that if you're a painter, for example, and you have blue paint and yellow paint, in order to perceive the same luminance in a painting, the brightness of the blue paint needs to be much higher than the brightness of the yellow paint. It's much easier to make bright colors with yellow than with blue. If you're a painter, you sort of know that instinctually. Last page of graphs, I promise. So looking at the three color cones, you can see that the bluish cone is sort of almost into the ultraviolet, whereas the green and red cones are very close together. They're crowded together. So the scientific consensus is that the red cones evolved from the green cones. So our ancestors used to have bicolor vision. There was a mutation, and the red cone evolved from the green cone. You can see there's not much separation between their color sensitivities. So in another million years, maybe there'll be more separation, and our eye brain won't have to work as well. And you can compare this to the sensitivities of some typical camera sensors. These are phone sensors, but digital camera, SLRs, DSLRs have a similar kind of sensitivity. And you can see more separation between each of the red, green, blue colors. If we were going to design an eye the way that we design cameras, this is how our eye would have been designed. But since we're the product of evolution, we've got these two cones that are close together, and the brain does the work of separating those into red, green, and blue, especially the green and the red. So what are the implications of this science? First of all, from the first slide, we see only clearly in the center of where we're focusing our eyes. If you keep your eye looking steady at something, our peripheral vision gets much more fuzzy, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The second implication is that if we're looking at art or creating art, it should be created or analyzed in the same light that it will be displayed in. Otherwise, the luminance differences and the color too, but also the luminance differences will not be the way that you want them. The third thing is that different colors at the same absolute luminance get perceived as having different luminances by our eye. We talked about this already, how blue paint is inherently darker than yellow paint, for example. This is a qualitative, meaning it's not exact, since we can't plug into either our output of our eyes or output of our brain, for example. It's a representation of what we see when we see the world. And I put in a glance in quotes, meaning our eyes are constantly jumping around, refocusing. But in that glance, this is what our eyes see. And what you'll notice in this view is that you only get high resolution and color, or the most color, in the very center of our vision. And then as you go outward in our visual frame, you both lose resolution and you lose saturation. So this is how we see the world. And if we look at an example in art, where artists have used this perception to make art, in this case, Degas, the subject of this painting, her face has high contrast and it's sharp, and the colors are saturated, whereas the rest of the painting is lower resolution and lower saturation. So our eyes are used to seeing this way, so we're comfortable looking at the world this way, and it makes it an attractive image, and also focuses our eyes. Our eyes will snap to the subject's face in this case. Explore a little bit around, but we're very comfortable looking at art this way. We look at an example in photography. I don't know who the photographer is, but if you know music, Elephant Revival, this is Bonnie Payne of Elephant Revival. This particular photographer used the same technique. The center of the photograph, especially the subject's face, is sharp and high contrast, and the outer parts of the photograph are lower resolution. Using examples from some of our club members, in this case, Ellen Davis, the upper image, there are two faces in the upper collage image, and our eye tends to spend most of our time tracking back and forth. But it explores a little more around, but mostly that's where our eyes focus to, and you can use this technique to keep eyes focused in a photograph. And in the lower image, depth of field was used so that the rest of the image supports the main in focus rivet, captures our attention, draws our eye to the center. This is one of my images of Rodney from Coloma. Again, this image uses depth of field. The eyes, the nose, and the mouth, what we can see of it, mostly hair, are sharp, and the rest of the image drops off. Our eyes love looking at images like this because this is how we see the world. Another couple of images by our president, Mike Shea, using the same technique, although maybe he didn't know he was using this technique. The left image, which is a little more psychedelic, again, same concept. The main subject is in focus and high resolution, and the rest is not. And the dancers on the right, the same technique is used, although in a more painterly processing of the image. Another image by Grace. This was from the critique last month. In this case, the low resolution part of the image is due to motion and not blurring or depth of field. Our eye is drawn to that center point where it's most in focus, and the rest of the image is supporting. A couple of images, or an image by Mike Shea. And in this case, these are GIFs or GIFs, depending how you feel, using two techniques to achieve the same result. In the left image, the original is color and the changed image is black and white. And the black and white is what you can see at the Granucci Gallery right now. In that left image, there is not a loss of resolution, but the vines and the wood give the same impression of loss of resolution. So by desaturating the image, you're making it more focused on the human subject in the middle, just letting the textures form that lower resolution. On the right, there was an intentional desaturation and blurring of the image that I did to the image to exhibit how you might process an image to achieve the same result. David, question, is the camera on me or the camera on the screen? Okay. So what did the Zoom people see? Oh, okay, so they can see that, great. I thought it was just through the camera. And finally, using the same technique on an image off, this is an image off the internet. Again, it's a GIF image, and you can see the image cycling between everything in focus and blurring the outside of the image. I did this in Photoshop using Gaussian blur. It's in the eye of the beholder whether this is an improvement or not. It's an exhibition of technique where you might blur the outside of the image to focus attention again on the faces. We're going to take a bird tangent because so many club members photograph birds. Now, as humans and especially as photographers, we might assume that because we see the world the way we do, that all of the other creatures see us in the same way, and that is absolutely not true. As we talked about, humans have 3 color receptors, 3 cone colors, with the 2 cones not very far apart. One example of another creature is birds. Birds have 4 cone colors, with the 4th color being deep into the ultraviolet. So what this means is that birds see millions more colors than we do. The example in the upper right of a mostly black bird with shimmery iridescent colors, we don't know what birds see, but this is an example of what birds might see, since they see millions more colors and they see colors that we can't see. So when we talk about LBBs, little brown birds, and how they look the same and how the sexes look the same, to birds, they absolutely see different colors in the different sexes of the birds. Even what we call white, which is equal amounts of red, green, and blue, that's not true for birds, since they have 4 color receptors. So what they see as white is not white. We don't know what birds see, but we do know that if we're going to make bird cameras or bird printers, it would be much more complex than the cameras that we have. And I throw in one other little example that's a little bit extreme, and that is a mantis shrimp. Mantis shrimps have 12 cones. They can see 12 different colors. Why they need this? I don't know, but it's an extreme example of how all of the other creatures see differently than we do. So diving back into the science a little bit, another aspect of our eye-brain combination is that our vision is sensitive to edges. The upper example, if you look at the gray bars on the far left of the left bar and the far right of the right bar, the luminance of the far left and the far right are the same. And then there's a gradation of tones in between that is plotted below, so that there's perceivable step change in luminance between the two bars. But our eyes see the whole left bar as being brighter than the whole right bar. And that's because we're sensitive to edges. Another way to see this edge sensitivity is to look at the shadowed newspaper in the lower image, and our eyes perceive the white part of the O as being darker than the black part of the S, which is not true. But because part of the image is shadowed, our brain processes it such that the white part of the O seems darker than the black part of the S, but that's not true. The absolute luminance of those is the opposite. Looking at an example of this, there was an experiment done where they had people view a painting by Shishkin with a man standing in trees, and they tracked where people's eye focused. And of course, the eyes spent a lot of time on the human figure, but when the eyes were not exploring the human figure, they were looking at where the bright met dark, the edges or high contrast transitions happen. So people's eyes mostly tracked the trees where the brightness differences were highest. If we look at an example in painting, Georgia O'Keeffe was a master of using this technique. In this painting, if you look at the upper hillsides, you can see how she painted the hills so that it got darker, 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 and then snapped to bright, darker, 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 snap to bright, darker, 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 snap to bright. If you look at her flower paintings and the petals, the effect is a little more subtle. I use this example because it's so obvious, but she was a master at controlling edges so that our eyes were interested in those places in the image and were more appealing. Here's an example from photography. This image by our member Ingrid Lockhart of A Ladder in Shadows, and you can just let your eyes explore the image and see where your eyes explore. Our eyes love the bright against dark of the ladder. They love the molding, the bright against dark of the molding, and they even love the bright and shadow edges of the light coming in from behind. Oops. Another image by Ingrid Lockhart, same technique. And this is especially true on the edge of the leaf. I don't know if Ingrid dodged this image to bring up the brightness of the edge of the leaf or of the leaves down below, but if it were my image, I absolutely would have. And this is the technique where you're trying to brighten an edge against darkness to follow the science of our eyes being interested in those bright edges against the dark. This, of course, also occurs in the bloom of the lily. Photo by, again, our own Douglas Hooper, where light painting was used, but even without light painting, our eyes explore the edge of the subject against the darkness, but especially with the light painting, the exaggeration of the lower edge of the subject against the darkness. Our eyes just love that bright against dark edge effect. Okay, switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about three-dimensionality in art. So painting and photography, or most painting and photography, is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional world. And usually what we want to do is make our images look as three-dimensional as possible, because this fits with our perception of the world. The world is three-dimensional, but all we've got is 2 dimensions to do that. And adding three-dimensionality to images also adds realism to the image. So let's talk about some ways to do that. Here are 6 ways to do it. The first 3 are perspective, shading, and occlusion. Perspective is obvious if you've ever taken any kind of an art class. They talk about parallel lines going into the distance and converging, and that's perspective and depth. Shading is obvious. There are lighter areas and darker areas when you have a single light source. The picture here for occlusion, I think this is from the book, and it's one of the few poor examples from the book. Occlusion just means that something is in front of something else, and therefore we know it's closer to us. And that's how our brain processes it. Again, the image of haze is not that great, but what it means is things that are farther away are hazier than things that are closer up. Stereopsis, we're not going to talk about that. This is more about stereo vision. If you've ever seen two images that were taken with a stereo camera, with stereo viewers, it's a way to get three-dimensionality, but most of the time we're not using that technique. And then relative motion. Relative motion means that if something is moving in an image, things that are closer to us move more than things farther away. We won't spend much time talking about that one either. So going back to the basics, these are, or this is an image of two butterflies. There's almost none of these techniques were applied. So the image looks pretty flat. I mean, you can tell that they're butterflies, but you don't know which one is closer. You don't know which direction they're flying. The artist is skilled, but there's no depth in this image. If we talk about adding these techniques in a few basic examples, on the far left with the dice, we can tell that they're dice, but there's no three-dimensionality. But if we add shading and perspective, we see three-dimensionality. And then on the far right, we add occlusion as well. And this is adding more depth as we add more of these techniques. Similarly with the oranges, we start off with what appears flat, and then we add shading and occlusion. And on the far right, if we add all of the techniques, we get a much more three-dimensional representation of what's going on. So this is a very basic way of looking at these techniques, but let's look at some examples. So in this case, there's shading and occlusion means that, for example, the subject's arm, we know it's closer to us than her dress. That's obvious, but it's how our brain processes it. The most important thing to look at in this image is the shading, especially in the subject's dress. If you look at the desaturated image, you can see how shading was used to add three-dimensionality to the dress. It almost looks like a photograph, although it's a painting. Another example from painting is this painting by Picasso. And even though it's a cubist image that's relatively disjointed in terms of structure, there's still shading and occlusion used. We know that the guitar is in front of the subject, and we can see lighting in the subject. So you can apply these techniques anywhere. Looking at some example photographs from club members, this one by Brian Dunbar. We have the classic perspective, converging lines into the distance that gives us a sense of depth. We have birds in front of the vegetation and birds in front of other birds. This is an excellent example of adding three-dimensionality to an image. Our eyes and our brain just know this is a three-dimensional image. This is one of my images with the technique of perspective, exaggerating the path to the standing stones. These are standing stones in Scotland. The path does not have classic converging lines, but it does have converging lines. If we assume the path is the same width off into the distance, that's perspective, and it adds depth to the image. Here's a photograph by our own Laura Greenman, applying the techniques of perspective and haze. and another photo by Laura showing the techniques of shading and occlusion. We know the rocks are round because of the shading, the way the lighting is applied, and also the foreground rocks are closer to us than the background rocks because they're occluding them. Photo by Jim Bear, landscape photo showing the techniques of haze and occlusion. And for landscape photos like this, you sort of get this for free, quote unquote. But the photographer, for example, could have not included the cactus slope in the foreground, for example, and that would have lent much less depth to this photograph. By including that slope and including the cactus, we have occlusion in the photograph, and there's much more of a sense of depth from front to back. Another photograph by our own Barbara Summers, and I just love this photograph because it has everything in it. There's non-classic perspective. If you start at the hand and go to the walking stick in the other hand, and then to the subject in the background, that's perspective. You also have occlusion with the figure in the foreground in front of the figure in the background. You've got shading from the lighting from left to right. You can see our brains perceive three-dimensionality in that, and then we've got the depth of field going on as well, which is haze. So this is a very three-dimensional photograph and an excellent example of all the techniques brought together. Thanks, Barbara. Another photo by Brian Dunbar on exhibit at Granucci as well right now, bringing three of the techniques: perspective. We've got the line of the canyon into the distance. That's perspective. Haze, of course. And then occlusion with the ridge line, ridge line, ridge line. And we've even got a little bit of Georgia O'Keeffe, darker, darker, darker light, darker, darker, darker light going on in the image. So a little bit of painterliness going on as well. Excellent example of three-dimensionality in a photograph. And then even in collage images, you can apply these techniques. This one by Janet Peters, where subjects were brought together and created. In this case, you can see that, haze was used in the image behind the tree and the bird and in front of the moon to add a sense of depth to the image. So even when you're creating things from scratch in a painterly fashion, you can use haze to give three-dimensionality to an image. And finally, one example of relative motion, this by photographer Cole Thompson, where there's motion in the clouds, and the clouds higher in the sky are closer to us because with the long exposure, the streaks are longer than the clouds farther away. And this adds three-dimensionality to an image. So you might think about this when you're photographing these main techniques for adding three-dimensionality and how you might bring these elements together to add three-dimensionality to your images. Okay, we're ready for advanced three-dimensionality, which I call differential luminance. So in addition to the techniques we talked about, you can either enhance or diminish the luminance of separate colors in paintings or photographs to enhance or diminish the feeling of three-dimensionality. Impressionist painters use diminishment of luminance between colors to add shimmery effects to their paintings or even mind-bending effects. And we'll look at some examples of those. In fact, when almost the definition of Impressionist painting was the employment of these techniques. Photographers usually, but of course not always, there's always exceptions, we're trying to achieve more three-dimensionality. So this concept was a revelation to me in this book. When I got it from this book, I put the book down, and it's like, I'm never going to see the world or painting or photography the same way again. It was a huge revelation to me. So let's talk about it. So our eye brain only perceives depth through luminance differences. Color does not give us any impression of depth. These 4 circles are an illustration of that. The 2 left circles are convex or concave because we're used to seeing lighting from above. The far left, we perceive that as concave because that's usually the lighting comes from above. And of course, the second from the left looks convex. And that's done all through luminance. If you look at the 3rd circle from the left, there's quote unquote shading, but it's done with color. But we don't perceive any depth in that. And if you look down at the desaturated image in the lower left, at the third from the left, you can see in the luminance, there's just a little brighter in across the center, but our brains do not perceive depth from that luminance difference because there is no luminance difference. There's only a color difference. And even looking at the far left circle, just the most subtle variations in shading we can perceive as having depth. This is how our brains work, brain plus eyes, sorry. If we look at examples in painting, this one by Derain, in the left image, you can see the original colors. The colors are unrealistic or exaggerated, but we still get a sense of depth from that image, even though the colors are all over the map. And the reason for that can be seen in the right image, which is desaturated. You can see that the luminance of the painter used the luminance of the paint to give a sense of depth to the image. He controlled the luminance of the paint so that the shadowed areas were darker than the brighter areas, even if the colors were not correct. Another example by Matisse using the same technique where the colors were all over the map, but we still get a sense of depth in the original left image. And again, you can see why in the right image. If you take the colors away, there are luminance differences that our brain reads as having depth. Let's talk about going that direction where we're diminishing the luminance differences between color. So in this illustration on the left, there's blue and red crosses with against a blue background. And I don't know about you, but I can't perceive any depth in that image. Is it a hill? Is it a pit? I'm not sure. And that's because there's no luminance cues for our brains, eye plus brain to work on. And you can see why in the desaturated image on the right, there's no luminance difference between those colors. An even more extreme example is using text. The black and white text, you can scan that in a second. You just read it. But the lower left, you have to concentrate and the text jumps around and it's really hard to read. And the reason for that, if you look at the desaturated image, if you look really closely, you can kind of see the text in there, but the luminance of that blue and the luminance of that red is exactly the same. And that's why it's hard to read. And the Impressionist painters used this luminance diminishment to give effects to their paintings. So let's talk about that. In this painting by Monet, who's probably the most famous example of using these techniques. In this case, we have low sun against maybe an industrial background with reflection in the water that looks shimmery to us. It gives a shimmery effect, and the sky as well looks a little bit shimmery. If we look at the original against a desaturated, you'll see that the sun has almost no luminance difference to the blue background. The reflection in the water has almost no luminance difference. The red reflection has almost no luminance difference compared to the bluer water around it, and as well as in the sky. Another painting by Monet, whoops. Another painting by Monet of a vineyard with workers. And in this case, that sort of impressionist feel of the colors that are sort of swimmy and almost iridescent, that's because of luminance diminishment. If we look at the whoops, there's a delay, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a GIF. Why isn't it circulating? There it goes. So notice up around the sun, the little waves coming off the sun are equal luminance to the sky behind it. The luminance of the water, there's some luminance differences in there, but not very high, and that looks shimmery to us. The vegetation of the vineyard, again, there's slight luminance differences, but not much. And that added that shimmery effect to the painting. Another painting by Monet of one of his poppy fields. This is a static image. So if you look at the mostly the poppies, but also the trees, you can imagine the tree leaves quaking in the wind, and the poppies maybe quaking as well. And that's because there aren't many luminance differences in either the poppy field or in the trees. So there's not much depth going on, and our eyes can't perceive depth, and gives that shimmery effect. So let's talk about the same technique in photography. Usually we're not going to go the direction of the impressionist painters. We want to go the other direction, and we want to add three-dimensionality in our images. You could go the other way, but mostly we won't. This is one of my images, and after reading the book and having my revelation, this is the image that I went to. This image hangs in our living room, so maybe that's one of the reasons why I went to this image. I love this image. I love photographing aspen trees, but there was always something a little bit off about this image. And it wasn't until I read this book that I figured out what was going on. So we've talked about this enough, and you can probably answer why this didn't feel right. And that's because there's not much luminance difference in the leaves in this photograph. There's of course luminance difference with the trunks of the aspens, and the aspens are in front of the leaves, but which of the leaves are in front of each other? If we look at a desaturated version of this image, you can see what's going on. For example, in the center area, it's just mud. There's no luminance difference between the yellow aspen leaves and the orange aspen leaves. And that takes away a feeling of depth in this image. Maybe you could say it's impressionistic, and it's better that way. That's in the eye of the beholder. But if we're going to go that direction, here is a GIF where I have differentially manipulated the luminance of the orange aspen leaves and the yellow aspen leaves to get more depth. As you see it cycling, you can see much more depth in the one where it's been manipulated. In fact, you can say there's the three-dimensional one and there's the flat one. And if we go to a GIF of just desaturated, you can see the same thing going on. You've got mud and you've got depth. You've got mud and you've got depth. So how do you do this? So I'm going to use the example of Lightroom and manipulating the luminance sliders in Lightroom. And before I had this revelation, of course, like most people, if I had a landscape picture and it had blue sky in it and I wanted the sky to get darker, you just pull the blue slider over to get darker sky. So I knew all that and I did all of that. But this idea of differentially manipulating colors that are next to each other in images was the revelation part of it. So to do this in Lightroom, without black and white, of course, you just exercise the luminance sliders. And you can see what I did for this Aspen image. I pulled I pulled the reds way down, pulled the oranges down a little bit, and I pulled the yellows up. So the orange Aspen leaves are actually mostly red, is what this is saying. But I pulled those luminance values apart in order to add that three-dimensionality. If you want to do it in black and white, unfortunately, with Lightroom, you think you could just pull the saturation slider to -100 and you have a desaturated image, and then you could exercise the luminance sliders and get luminance differences, but you can't. Doesn't work that way. That seems like a bug, but I'm not sure. So one way to do it is to leave the saturation at 0, go to the saturation panel in the HSL panel, and pull all of your sliders to -100, which desaturates the image because you're pulling the saturation of all of the separate colors to 0. Then you can go back to luminance panel and differentially adjust the luminances of the colors. And then you can see the depth come into your desaturated image. Another way to do it, of course, is just to click on the black and white button. But a lot of people aren't familiar with that. They're not used to working in black and white. So that's an alternate technique. And those who work with black and white probably would go that way if you want to analyze an image in black and white. So let's apply this to some images. This is an image by our own Mike Shea. The original is on the top. The lower left desaturated image is just a straight desaturation of the original image. And you can see there's not much luminance difference between the edges of the steps and the yellow edges of the steps and the blue walls. By differentially differentially increasing the luminance between the colors, you can see in that right image, the yellows of the steps have been increased in relation to the blues. And if we look at a GIF of the technique, it makes the yellows pop, but to my eye, it also adds more three-dimensionality to the image because our eyes are seeing more depth because of the luminance differences. Let that cycle a few more times. Here's a photo by our own Laura Greenman, where I've used the same technique to vary the luminances between the colors in the image. And in this photograph, because there's not a background, this doesn't necessarily add depth, but it certainly adds pop to the image. This photograph by Janet Peters, using the same technique. In this case, it adds pop, but to my eye, it also adds three-dimensionality to the image. And you could ask yourself, is this adding non-realism? Are you deviating from reality? That's up to the photographer, but it's a technique that you might exercise. Photo by Jim Bear, using the same technique. Brings out more detail in the leaves, but again, to my eye, it adds three-dimensionality as well. If you look at this, I don't have this example in black and white, but again, there's not much luminance difference in the leaves in the before. Another photo by Jim Bear. In this case, this shows that it can go both ways. So what I tried to do in the lower right was increase more luminance difference between the purple flowers and the green leaves. So the purple luminance was increased and the green luminance was decreased, and you can make those flowers pop. However, if you look in the upper left or the far left, by decreasing the luminance of the green, to me, that's less attractive. So it depends on the photograph. You may not want to apply this technique globally to a photograph. You might want to apply it just to one area of the photograph and leave the other area of the photograph alone. Photo by Henry Goodman. You can tell that this works well on foliage because there's a variety, not only a variety of colors in foliage, but foliage tends to overlap, and if there's not luminance differences between them, there's not depth in the images. Again, it's in the eye of the beholder. Is the before better than the after? It's up to the photographer, but it's definitely a technique you can use. In this case, the yellow luminance was brought up, the purple luminance was brought up, and the green luminance was brought down. To my eye, there's more three-dimensionality in the image. Another photo by Laura Greenman that was obviously post-processed to be more painterly. In this case, the purple luminance was brought up and the green luminance and probably yellow was brought down as well. Adds more three-dimensionality to my eye, even in a photo that's been post-processed to look more painterly. I tried to go the other way. Grabbed this photo off the internet, photographer named Jim Jackson, where I tried to decrease the luminance differences. And was I able to make it more impressionistic? I don't think so, but I had a hard time with the photograph trying to make it more impressionistic, which tells me that usually we want to go the other way. So this is before, after, before, after, before, after. I don't know, maybe it's okay. Another photo by Jim Bear of a flower. I don't see much three-dimensionality being added, but it makes the yellow flower pop more. And I don't know, I'll disagree with that. The flower looks more three-dimensional to me. This was an image that was a set of images that was sent to me by a club member of fall in Zion National Park. There was a lot of fall foliage in it. And when I looked at it, the photographs were okay, but they just looked flat to me. There was no depth and no pop to them. So I worked them using this technique, and to my eye, they're more appealing. So before, after, before, after, before, after. And here's the famous Charles Kramer. I have the audacity to manipulate Charles Kramer images. So in this case, I've got side-by-side images, the original on the left and desaturated on the right. And let's start with the desaturated. If you look at the red leaves against a dark background, you can see before, after, after. So on the before, there's not much luminance difference between the red leaves and the grayish background, this sort of gray against gray, which tells me that there's, if I'm analyzing an image, there's potential for increasing three-dimensionality and increasing pop in an image. So on the left image, before, after, you can see that those leaves really pop. Since they're not a very big part of the image, I can't claim that it's adding three-dimensionality, but it's certainly something to think about with your images. Is my manipulation of this image maybe going a little too far with the red leaves? Probably, but maybe something in between might be better. And so it works even in an image where it's mostly black and white. I mean, obviously it's color image. You can see a little green in the background. The image was mostly just gray trees. But even in an image that's already mostly desaturated, you can use this technique. And that's it. Thank you to all the photographers who gave their permission to use their images, and for trusting me to use their images in a way that was useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Do we have any Q&A, any questions? I can't see anyone in the hall, so Mike, I'll leave it to you to handle that. Mike or Chris.
He's working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it. Well, I really enjoyed your presentation. Great. And so you are using the luminance slider, correct?
That's
But I
correct.
mean, could you make a selection of, like, just say the red leaves in that last picture, and then use curves or levels or something like that to achieve the same effect?
Yes, absolutely. There are many other ways of doing it,
Okay.
both in Photoshop and Lightroom, or Camera Raw, or any other tools where you can either select color and vary just the color section, or manipulate the luminance of color separately.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Henry has a question.
That's right. Chris, you were saying when you decrease the luminance, you have a shimmering effect.
That's what impressionist painters try to do.
So
Yes.
why does it have that shimmering effect? I mean, I didn't get that.
So I'll go back to the example of the text, that text. So does that text look shimmery to you, Henry? Kind of jumpy? And that it's shimmery because if you look at the desaturated, there's no luminance difference between the red and the blue. So decreasing the luminance difference makes our eyes not have the impression of depth, and that's what gives that shimmery, is the lack of ability to perceive depth. That's probably true, but I think it would work with any colors, I believe.
Just one comment. I once took a class on color, and I think, I took a class on color, and if you had, I think it was complementary colors, that they would tend to shimmer more.
Ah, okay. Obviously, I'm not trained.
We have a question on Zoom, I think. Keith, I see you raising your hand.
Yes. Can you hear me here now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Back at the beginning of your presentation, you said your eyes only focus sharply in the center. And you had a picture with the center part in focus and the outer edges kind of blurred. So that to me says that the subject of your picture, of your image, should be centered. But that deviates from everything I've learned about photography, in that your image shouldn't be in the center, but it should be at one of these 1/3 or 2/3 points in the image. So how do you rectify those two inconsistencies?
So let's look at these images by Mike Shea, especially the one on the right. So the idea is that our eyes like to look at something that's high contrast and sharp. So in the case of the right image with the dancers, especially the left figure, The in focus and high contrast is on the subject's face and body. And that is a non-centered subject, but our eyes are still drawn to that figure. Also in the upper image in this case, by Ellen Davis, our eyes are drawn to the two faces that are most in focus and contrast. It's a technique for drawing our attention in photographs. Does that answer your question?
Not really, because I'm still confused about if your eyes see things better in the center of an image, then why don't you put your subject in the center of all the images you make, as opposed to putting your subject in one of the 1/3 locations?
This is this image is a qualitative representation of how we see. So our eyes are constantly shifting when we're looking at something and when we're looking at an image. It's showing that that we have highest resolution and highest color perception in the center of our vision, but that doesn't mean that our eyes don't move around in an image. In fact, the best images are where our eyes are drawn around in an image. That makes images most interesting. Again, this example by Ellen Davis is a good example of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, Chris, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're going to take a break now. There's refreshments in the back, thanks to Bill Summers. And then we will resume in about 10 minutes because we've got a lot of images to go through on the critique. So we'll see you then. Okay, we're getting ready to start the second half here. We're going to do our critiques and show the winners from the last month. I've got a few announcements I want to make. First off, next meeting, the April meeting, both myself and Grace are going to be gone. And David is going to be gone. So it's going to be an in-person meeting only. We are not going to have a Zoom option. So those of you that are on Zoom might be a chance to come and, sit down and enjoy the meeting in person. So next meeting, no Zoom option. We've had a suggestion that we change our voting method for favorite photos of the month. So we're not going to be deciding that now, but I just kind of wanted to bring it up. It's instead of voting for one image per category, one of the suggestion is that you get, let's just say there's 15 categories. So instead of voting for one image per category, you get 15 votes to vote however you want. So that's one suggestion. Another suggestion is you still vote one per category, but you get a couple of like wild card votes. So you might be thinking about that because we're going to be putting it to the membership. The board's going to kind of figure out what we think is the best method to do. Then we're going to put it to the membership to vote on whether you want to make changes like that. So that's coming up. I said earlier tonight that Mike Oitzman is our new field trip coordinator. I'd like to introduce Mike, and he'd like to say a few words.
So, yes, I'm stepping in to pick up the field trips with Dave and Bill. I'm busy with other things this year. I've done this before with you guys. The last couple of years, we've done the evening astrophotography thing. So not new to this, but anyhow, so here's what I'm putting out to you guys now. Already had some great suggestions during the break. Now that you know what my face looks like, I'm probably the tallest guy in here. I can take claim to that. So just find the tallest guy in the room. Come give me your ideas for what you want to take pictures of, both what you want to take pictures of, and if you have some specific ideas about places to go, give me those as well. I will start a thread on Facebook, so that can be a place where you can come just make a comment and say, hey, Mike, what about this? What about that? And everybody else can do that. So that'll be the place that we do that. I'm a little bit excited about this, so I'm going to get going here. I was just out scouting Table Mountain last night to see what's going on there. We're going to do something there first here in the next couple of weeks. So just so you know, got Table Mountain already following the tulips up at the Hermitage at Ananda. That'll be another place pretty shortly. So we might have a couple real quick here just to take advantage of flowers, right? Because they don't last forever. And then we'll talk about some longer term ones to spread them throughout the rest of the year. All right. So I'm Mike and looking forward to an exciting year in the field. Okay.
Okay, now we'd like to go show you the favorite photos from the last month submissions. So the assigned subject was Another's Love, and the winner, the winner is A Mother's Love by Darby Davenport. Abstract, Weston Island by myself, Mike Shea. Architecture, Courthouse by Hano Botha. For fauna, The Villain by Bob Free. And I guess it was a tie. A Moment by Janice Rosner. Flora, Nature Stillness by Jonathan Beth. And another natural landscape, Ancient Coast Live Oak by Eric Ingalls. Night Photography, Nevada City Twilight Fog by John Sievert. People, Portrait in the Barn by Emily Weissman. For journalism, Nice Catch in California, I guess Catching a Wave, Jim Bear. Travel, Roman Ruins in France by Martin Powell. For creative, Roman Ponder by Douglas Hooper. Manipulated but Realistic, The Butterfly by Darby Davenport. For black and white, Winter Solace by Suzanne Hamilton. And for color, Umbrellas by Jerry Thomas. For phone, Windy on the Ridge by Tom Quinn. So round of applause for our winners for last month. And now we're going to get into the critique portion of the show. And I'd like to thank Douglas Hooper and Tom Quinn for doing the critiques.
No.
Reading the titles, dude. All right, here we go.
Chandon Blanc de Noir. Mind if I sit there? No. I forgot to bring a light. You need a.
Yeah, and the other part of that was
It's
San
too bright, so
Francisco.
I'll be able to just from the light of the screen. We'll find out.
Okay. Just a real quick preface. If Tom and I are saying you can do this and this with your photo and you don't know what we're talking about, feel free to ask the other members. We're a very helpful group. And then regarding the assigned subject category for this month, I went back and looked at it. It says motion blur or pan. And it seems like about half the pictures thought it said motion, comma, blur, comma, or pan. So I got amusement out of that. Now to the critique. This one clearly shows a lot of motion. It's a cool photo. The title's changed. Oh, it does say 1984. Apparently done a long time ago. It's a crowded crop. I do wish there's a little more space on the left side of the bottle. And the artist intentionally made the blacks not black, which is surprising for a subject like this. But the message still comes across quite clearly that that's a hard photo to achieve with the liquid flying out of the glass like that. It's a nice job.
And the photographer was Shelby Cohen. Next image, Dancing the Night Away. Oh, I don't know that I have to read the titles, right? They're right there.
Usually.
Okay, I'll do it anyway. Dancing the Night Away.
Everybody can hear me with this mic, right? Okay, I forgot to bring a light today, so that's gonna be intriguing. All right, also just another little preface, we have 84 images, so we're gonna make these a little quick today, all right? So I got a light, thank you. I really like this pleasing image, but kind of a fun, creative crop, unusual crop. Wouldn't think of taking a photo just from the waist down and the legs there. Really nice, vibrant colors, great sense of motion. The side category of the blurring, motion blur, they didn't need to do much here with the dancing going on, or just a little bit of a long exposure. And I love the lines of the legs and the different shades of colors in contrast to each other. Just a great fun photo. Thank you.
And the photographer was Allison Cladd. Next image, hummingbird feeders.
This is a really cool multiple image. It created a really nice pattern, and you kind of got a muted color palette that I think is really pleasing. I admire those qualities of this photograph. The seen up close, it's noisy to the point of looking grainy. I think the artist intended that to give it a feeling of graininess. So I think it's a successful effort at creating an abstract type of image.
Photographer was Jerry Thomas. Next image, In Flight.
Well, great blue herons are always great subjects. In fact, I think we have 3 maybe tonight in different categories. For the photographer's suggestion, a nice effect in capturing flying birds in focus with a blurred background is one technique. Or you can just go with the fast moving wings being blurred, and that can create a nice effect as well. The overall lack of focus on this particular photo with the entire bird being out of focus just it didn't really work for me. But perhaps okay, given the subject of the assigned category. And I overall found the exposure to be much too bright and need to be toned down some. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Photographer was Gary Kartsnafter. Next image,
This is really fun, colorful image.
Go
that-
Home Tulip.
Right,
You're
there's the
drunk.
title. Go Home Tulip. You're drunk. The fun image, the fun title. It really draws you in with the swirl, the circular motion. I like all the fun colors and the excitement of this picture. The one comment I have about observations on it is you decided to make the dark purple flower the center of attention for the image. And as Chris was talking about what our eyes like to look at, our eyes are drawn to light colors. And since that's the darkest, pretty much the darkest place in the whole picture, it's kind of a little contrary to ask your viewer to look at the darkest thing in the picture. So that's just something to be aware of when creating these pictures. Other than that, I think it's a very successful image.
Photographer is Ellen Davis. Next image. You got this one, son.
Well, I really love the sense of action in this image, and I think the photographer choosing to go with black and white was an excellent choice for this. This could have easily been entered in our photojournalism category and probably done very well there. I love the greatly blurred background and the horse legs being blurred, really giving that great sense of motion. And yet there's just enough crispness in the horse's head, the white horse's head, and in the little boy's body that really added a nice element to the rest of the motion blur. So great job, and thanks for sharing that.
And that's by Grace Farragut. Next image. Fall on at Ruby Marsh.
I think this is a tremendously successful image. I just loved it from the moment I saw it. The motion was just done perfectly to pull this all together. if this were my image and I was going to display it large on the wall, I actually would burn in the bottom slightly. I feel like that would balance the picture a little better. Very small criticism for what I think is a really, really beautiful picture.
And that was by Janice Rosner. Next image, fast food.
Love the title, obviously, clever title, and a real kind of soft, pretty color palette. On this screen, it looks quite more subdued than it did on my monitor at home. The idea of blurring a fruit still life seems a little odd, but it works. And I could actually picture myself like sitting at a long bar and ordering a bowl of fruit and having the bartender scoot that whole bowl on down the bar. That's it.
And that's by Deanne Danelli. Next image. The end is in sight.
Well, here's a textbook perfect example of a panned image. Nice job. The man's face is really sharp. The top of his jersey is really sharp. Everything else has varying amounts of blur to it, and that's just perfect. The cropping was a little interesting to me at first, and then I decided I liked it with a little more space behind him. It feels like he's just raced down a hill, and he was so fast, the photographer was keeping up with him. Again, if I was going to really print this, publish it, something like that, the bright orange blur right behind his helmet, I might change the color of that. You could go with the same blue of the helmet, then it would really look like he was streaking by. This is a beautiful pan. Nice job.
And that's by Mike Oitzman. Splashdown.
Cool photo, really bright, vibrant colors. It almost has kind of a pop art vibe to me. Interesting choice from the photographer to blur the entire photo to some degree, and not just the long exposure blurring of the water as it enters the cup there. At first, I wasn't sure about that choice, about blurring the whole photo. I'm not even sure exactly what the photographer did, whether it was done in post or intentional camera movement. But for this category especially, it works, and good job.
By Kathy Triolo. This next image is untitled.
This one kind of draws you in. It's kind of interesting that the dark's in the middle, the light's around the outside. That's unorthodox usually for making images. And the swirl gives it an intriguing effect. I do like the peripheral objects, the buildings and the fence. The very center of the picture, though, is darkness with no shadow detail. I kind of regret that. I would like to have a center of interest to look at in this picture. Other than that, I think it's well done.
The photographer was Emily Weissman. Daydream by the Pond.
Yeah, this is a very pretty image, and folks may be familiar with it from the winery show. I love the wide range of shades of greens in there, and then of course that great purple bullseye, so to speak, positioned nicely above the center. Lots of sponge shapes and forms in this image, all surrounding and or pointing towards that purple middle, combined with the lens rays from the rolling of the zoom lens, I assume, all pointing towards that purple center. Really comes together well. Great image for this assigned subject.
The photographer was Deanne Danelli. Next category is abstract. And our first image is Cocoon.
Soft, calming image. No shortage of this subject matter around this year. Really nice textures, tough to do the shots like this without completely blowing out some of the whites. A little bright on the far left side of the hump there. I will say, like many entries into this category, it does beg the question of exactly what abstract means, but we don't need to really go there today, but something to think about. And sometimes that can be in the eye of the beholder. And if a mound of snow can be abstract, why not? So it's a pleasing image.
By George Papel. Reflection.
This is a gorgeous collection of colors and even more vivid on my monitor at home. I love the color palette of this one, and its overall texture is just all very pleasing to me. The cropping is nice, the tonality is nice. The one curiosity is halfway down the left edge. It looks almost like a man-made object or perhaps some extra cloning. So my eye got stuck there briefly, but that's a tiny detail on a really gorgeous image.
And the photographer was Tom Quinn. 3x5.
This is nice, abstract. I think the photographer had plenty of dots to choose from and chose these 15 with the detail of the Phillips head screw as a central point of focus. And I think it's a successful image in that way. Not much else to say about it. I think it worked well.
And the image is by Brad Oliver. Now we move to the architecture category. And the first image is Madonna Avignon, France. I'm probably mispronounced that. I should have had you do that one, George.
Really nice composition here. At first, I thought that was a modern structure in the back, and I was going to talk about the juxtaposition of the older and the new, but I believe that's just probably the tower for that church that's under rehabilitation, be my guess. That's actually probably a temporary structure. Anyway, a nice composition that nicely frames the golden Madonna figure there. There's a whole lot going on in here, all sorts of geometric patterns and shapes. And I thought it was a good exposure under challenging conditions of bright and shadowed areas, highlighting all around the golden Madonna.
And that image is by Fred Finney. Our next image is Cathedral of Evora Rooftop.
Well, here's a really formal composition, and the composition is very pleasing to look at. The sky behind apparently was a lot brighter, and the artist brought it down. Some haloing did occur. So it'd be, you might want to learn a few more techniques for bringing the sky down or replacing the sky, whichever is the case here. With that aside, I think it's a very successful image. Everything else is nice. There's pleasing lighting on the building and good exposure, good cropping.
Our photographer was Gary Emanuel. Austin, Sunset View.
Well, obviously a visually striking image, almost as if the building is on fire. Really nice, strong vertical and horizontal lines in here. When I took a little closer look at it, I don't know, perhaps it was taken with a phone or some low resolution sensor. There's quite a bit of haloing and digital noise all around those sharp edges, both on the crane and all the edges around the building that I found somewhat distracting. Sometimes that's an artifact of over sharpening, and that possibly could be the case here. But all in all, very nice and visually striking architectural image.
And the photographer was Bernadette Sylvester. Our next category is fauna. And the first image, snow goose.
This is really cool that the photographer was able to have an animal with such a blank background, so you can isolate the subject. That's nice. And then even the reeds in the foreground give us a little bit of a three-dimensional feeling for it. The color palette is also a little bit warm, which I think is a nice change for a subject like this. The goose is facing away slightly. In a perfect world, might be facing a little more this way, but I think it's fine. The technical quality is a little strange. It looks like something happened in the resolution from the camera to the computer to ending up here. It's got some bad edges and graininess and low resolution in it. So you might want to check on the process, getting the picture from A to B here.
The photographer, Eleni Prusa. Next image, Sandhill Crane in flight.
Well, we see quite a few Sandhill Crane shots in this club, and they're almost all beautiful, and this is no exception. Really nice in-flight capture. I found a nice, soft, non-distracting background and a mostly crisp focus on the bird, including that wonderful orange eye. And I really love the graceful positioning of the wings in this photo, particularly that far left wing with that little upward curl. All in all, a really nice shot of Sandhill Crane. Thanks.
Photographer, Frank Bloksberg. Just washed hair.
Well, there's your critique. For those at home who didn't hear it, everybody laughed. It's a fantastic picture, a very humorous picture. The photographer did this perfectly with the cropping, framing, the lighting. The very front of the beak is slightly out of focus. The very back of the feathers on the bird is slightly out of focus, meaning this is perfectly focused. Background is way out, which is pleasing. There's a little catch light in the viewer's left eye, the bird's right eye. So kudos all around. This photo is really well done.
The photographer was Brian Dunbar. Enough already.
Well, a cute image and a cute title, and one I know I can personally relate to. That wonderful green back of that little Hummer stands in stark contrast to the white and gray shades of winter, and perhaps adds promise of a spring yet to come, just not tomorrow, apparently. So, nice shot.
The photographer was Bob Free. Ah, sunshine.
Good title. The image of the bird it's an unusual bird. It's very engaging to look at. And then the sun and the color on its face makes it really interesting to look at. It's an eye-catching image in that way. It is an interesting cropping choice. The photographer has the bird looking to our right and the right edge of the frame kind of close to the bird. The stick on the left coming up, I think, is a beautiful branch. And I can see well what the photographer included at. It did make for kind of a compositional challenge. And it's up to the viewer to decide how well that succeeded. It may have been zoomed in. This may be a larger image that was zoomed in a little. The sharpness isn't 100% there, but it's 99% there. So it's a pretty good image. Nice.
And the photographer was Larry Lefman. Reride.
Well, it's pics like this that make me wish I was going on the David Wong trip to Africa. A fun and exotic image, capturing not only the beauty, but the symbiotic relationships between the animals in this picture. Nice background, non-distracting, provides nice contrast with the zebra without distraction. The top part of the sky might be unnecessary. I kind of played around with cropping just down a little bit to the next brown layer, and that's a matter of personal choice, and I'm sure the photographer liked it just the way it is. And lastly, in terms of crop, I felt the crop on the left was definitely a little tight compared to where it is on the right. And sometimes in an effort to avoid putting things right smack in the center, maybe we get carried away and moving them away from the center. But tight on the left, lots of room on the right from my perspective. But to me, that's just quibbling over a really, really nice wildlife photo.
And the photographer was Janice Rosner. Cooper's Hawk dining on gourmet meal of dove.
Here's your National Geographic moment. This is a really well done picture of this hawk. It's technically perfect. It's a little bit gruesome to look down at its feet and see what's really going on. But with the lighting and the snow background, this picture is really well done.
Photographer was Fred Clausens. Blue heron.
Well, second one today. Understandably, great blue heron, a commonly photographed bird. Sometimes you see one that surprises you, and I think this is one such image. Really nice exposure, good detail, and a wonderful pose, one that you don't often see of a great blue heron in flight. Kind of an interesting, some might say busy, but I found it non-distracting background. Could even argue those little bury those fruits up there, add another element to the photo. And I just loved the position of the head, tucked on the neck, tucked under that wing. Quite crisp, not 100%, but pretty well done for in flight. And I just love that blue-white back, the details on that and this shot. Again, an angle yet maybe you don't see that often with the great blue heron. So nice pick.
Photographer Daniel Chaplin. Moray eel, Raha Airport. Airport. I got low light here. I'm sorry.
You stole your light.
Yeah, this makes a really interesting wildlife picture. We don't see these very often. I'm guessing this is through aquarium glass, but I'd hate to assume. somebody actually dove down and got this picture. It's very well lit. The lighting is very even. I like the blue water up top. It gives more context for the picture. The picture, I think, because it's through aquarium glass, is pretty blurry at the edges. And I don't think the picture needs about 15% of the right side. I think that could be cropped off, and then that's also the most blurry part. So that's a win-win, cropping that. It's a very dramatic looking animal, so you've got a very engaging picture here.
The photographer was Mark Davis.
Oh, he actually dives, so he may have
Yeah, I
been.
thought that was a time shot, yeah.
And the next image is burrowing owl.
Very calming, beautiful image, wonderful background and foreground, framing the well-positioned owl. I think this would look really nice printed and hanging on the wall personally. The focus is slightly soft on the bird. Doesn't look bad up there. If you zoom in a bit, it's pretty soft. I think if perfectly crisp, it would take this image from good to great. But with that said, I still love it.
Photographer Martin Powell. So now we're moving to the flora category. Maple.
This is a beautiful, very three-dimensional picture. It's very satisfying. It makes me want to just reach out and touch that leaf in the center. It looks like it would be cool and soft. So I love those qualities of this photograph. I think the cropping and framing is very nice. I wondered myself if I might like to see more on the left and have the central leaf more towards the right of the picture, but I changed my mind. I think I like the way this is cropped. The lighting is beautiful. The little splashes of sunshine can be hard to handle, but they're well handled in this one. Nice job.
And that image was by Sheila Ryan. Our next image, Calla Lily Sunrise.
Calla lily is another understandably favorite subject of photographers, including club members. I found myself having mixed feelings about this photo. Technically, very well done in terms of focus and exposure. Beautiful light on that primary flower and the leaves. I think it's the framing and the angle of the shot that doesn't work for me. It doesn't fit my eye. The upper right portion feels unnecessary and feels too, I don't know, like in a perfect row there. I don't know, it feels too much like it's in a nursery versus in a more wild setting. And that leaves the main subject rather tight on the left with that rest of that stuff going off on the right. That's just my perspective, and I thought a different shooting angle might have enhanced this very pretty scene. That said, it's probably exactly the way the photographer wanted it.
The photographer was Brian Dunbar. Berries and Rain.
This is a pleasing image, nice color range in this picture. I like the cropping, the framing. I'm kind of curious about the lighter foggy vignetting on the sides, and then the little sparkles in the raindrops look kind of like crosses. I wonder if things were done to this photo other than just a straight shot. I can't tell. I like the cool color of the red and the berries. That's, I think, what I like best about this picture. It's not a strong center of interest, but it's strong enough to carry the picture. I think it ended up succeeding. Nice picture.
And the photographer, Patricia Leviton. White Lace.
Yeah, I felt a little touch of PTSD when I pulled this one up. Looks an awful lot like the view out my kitchen window for way too many days. That said, it's I guess a pretty winter scene. Paradoxically, scenes like this can feel like they have both too much going on and not enough going on. I.e., it's busy without any real strong elements to hold your eye for your eye to settle on. And in the flora category, I feel like it needs more with more of the flora and less of the snow. Personal opinion. Maybe I would feel better about this image in August.
And the photographer was Ann Westling.
Sorry, Ann.
Budding of Spring.
This is a gorgeous picture. Is this hydrangea? I believe. Such a beautiful picture of this flower just coming in, coming out. The balance of this picture for me is a little odd. I think a bit can be cropped off the right side and the picture will improve and balance better. And other than that one comment, I think the lighting is good. The focus is really good on this. It's a really pleasing flower picture.
And the photographer was Jimmy Marchio. We move into the natural landscape category, and our first image is Sutter Buttes.
Obviously, the wow factor in this is the birds. Wow, that is a lot of birds. And I didn't get so lucky on my trips down the hill to the rice fields this year for whatever reasons, but given that all those birds is really what keeps drawing your eye in this photo, I think it will be more appropriate in the wildlife category. In the natural landscape category itself, the landscape in this image is really rather bland, and the power poles don't really help with that either. They are not the stars. The landscape is not the star of this incredible photo. It's all those birds.
And the photographer was Sheila Ryan. Next up, Minorca Island Storm at Dawn.
This is a pleasant picture with the cloudy lighting, which made it nice and even and allowed the colors to come forward. The cropping, the framing is nice. The horizon, unfortunately, is not level. Pictures like this really need a level horizon. It's too low on the right. The other suggestion I had for this is the main two things that attract my eye are the rock out in the ocean and then the yellow flowers in the central foreground. And I think if the photographer had lowered the angle of the camera maybe a foot or two, the yellow flowers and the rock out in the ocean could have been brought more together with each other closer. Something to try. Other than that, it's a very nice, pleasing image.
And that's by John Sievert. Our next image is River Levi. I can't pronounce the results.
Leviathan.
Hold on. Leviathan. Thank you, Craig.
I love the title. And when I saw the title, it made me wonder if I would have seen the quote unquote whales without having seen the title first. And I'm quite sure I would have. They really do strike me as what the photographer saw. Well seen, well captured, technically very well done, long exposure of what I assume is a South Yuba, but could be a different pork, I guess. And great photo, love it.
And that was by our presenter, tonight's presenter, Chris Schiller.
Well, I would have been harsher, but
Baja Dreams.
It's a beautiful sunset with the blues and oranges. I just love all those colors, and I love the way in the water they're softer than they are in the sky. That's a fun contrast. The horizon on this one is not level, not even close. Pictures like this, unless there's a quirky, edgy reason for a slanted horizon, it pretty much needs to be level to be a successful picture. So you want to lower the right side of this one. The boat makes a nice little accent off to the side. I think that gives the picture another dimension. And we are at home on my monitor, like so many of these, the colors were richer. The projector is looking a little lighter.
And photographer was Jimmy Marchio. Next up, Yuba Wild.
well, the title doesn't leave you guessing which river this is, although I guess we can't be sure which fork of the Yuba it is. Another fabulous long exposure of the river at a fairly high level. Most of our long exposure shots are when the river's a bit lower. Subsequently, less clarity in the river, which I thought added a different and nice shade of green to the image. That really soft, flowing color of the shades of green, I think really works here. Nice framing, a little bit of a panoramic long rectangle. I just love those velvety, smooth river textures in this one. I think it's very well done.
And that was by Grace Perry. Next image, Spring Creek, 1 second exposure.
This is a really well done photo. I've studied this to see if I would change anything. I just wouldn't change anything. I think the cropping was well chosen, the exposure, the timing of the exposure, the lighting. It's a very nicely done image. It's really pretty.
That's by Henry Goodman. Slot Canyon.
Another example of just how many great landscape images we have the pleasure of seeing in our club, week after week, month after month. This one is a somewhat classic scene, maybe Antelope Canyon or similar Slot Canyon. I've seen a lot of pictures from these canyons and I've spent some time in these canyons, but often not as well executed as this one. Tough exposure, good handling of the tough exposure challenge of that bright section, as well as still having some detail in the darker sections. They still hold their form and texture of interest without blowing out that brighter upper area. I'm not sure about the bright magenta shades in this, whether those are quite accurate. I know you do get some interesting colors down in those canyons. That's kind of looks a little bit unusual to me, but the light does do some crazy things. All in all, beautiful and well done.
The photographer was Martin Powell. Floating on a cloud.
Apparently a picture from an airplane. It's just a spectacular scene that you came across and had the presence of mind to photograph. And you framed it and cropped it really nicely. Exposure looks good and all that. The image quality itself looks very grainy and broken up when seen up close. I know you're probably going through an airplane window, and that's going to bring it down a little. The photos I've done through airplane windows are not perfect, but they have more quality than this. So you might want to check and see where some of the graininess came in the process from camera to here. That aside, it's quite a spectacular scene that you're bringing to us to see. Cool.
The photographer was Gary Emanuel. Grandeur of nature.
Cool black and white image. Nice framing, although I thought perhaps a bit more of what we don't see above this image I was a little curious about, and we probably could have done with a little bit less at the bottom. Just personal opinion. Good exposure control, given the really bright whites and dark areas in there. I would just say thank you for adding a black and white entry to our landscape category.
And the photographer was Anita Duprat. Moody skies.
Quite a sunset picture. I love the blue shining through the clouds. I actually saw this and thought I would like to see just the clouds. I don't really, you call it quirky, but for this one, I don't want the foreground. I want just the clouds, probably the left 2/3 of the sky. So that's my unusual critique on this one. Conventionally, it's really well done. The exposure's good and the framing's nice and wide for this subject. So it's good.
That was by Bob Free. Eagle Eyes over Philly, autumn sunrise.
Well, I grew up in the East Coast and I've been to Philly a number of times. I wish it looked more like this. I'm not familiar with this particular spot. Very pretty autumn scene. Just a few touches of autumn color, really not bright, dramatic, but nice little oranges and yellows on the other side of the pond there. I like that tree framing in the upper left. And it was when I was looking at that framed upper left that I even noticed the eagle. And then I went to the title. It's Eagle Eyes over Philly Autumn Scene. And I'm guessing now most of you are seeing that eagle for the first time as well. So pretty subtle, and without the title, might have missed them altogether. Just strictly as a landscape scene, the white vans that are very prominent to me, there's several of them over there, really detract from the otherwise pretty autumn scene. So thanks.
The photographer was Allison Colt. Now we're moving into the night photography category, and we have one entry, Stillness in Trinidad.
This one was well done. The photographer got the concept down, and the foreground and the midground and the sky, all that was thought out well. And again, seeing this up close, the foreground image is really high quality. And I want to compliment the photographer for getting the lighting even on the foreground, the midground, and then the sky. That's hard to do, and it's really well done in this one. So the foreground, the image quality is almost perfect. The trees across the pond are kind of grainy, and then the sky is very grainy. So some quality was lost along the way, unfortunately. We might look into how, if that can be recovered or just be aware of it in the future. Other than that, a really good image.
The photographer was Dave McClellan. Now we're moving on to people. Leonka.
We see many fantastic photos of performance artists in this club, and this is just one more example. Really perfect execution of exposure, focus, and capture of a compelling pose. I love the hands, particularly the one looking towards her face. Although that hair across her face adds a nice sense of motion to her dancing, personally, I found it a bit distracting, and in the people category particularly, detracting a little bit from what looks to be a really great facial expression. Just as another note, I found it fun discovering that wonderful little starburst down by her knee, added a really nice element to a beautiful photo.
And the photographer is Mike Shea. Oh, I mean Shea. Grooming artist.
So I'm glad the photographer gave this photo an attempt, an effort. It's an interesting kind of grab shot walking on by through the window of a barber shop, apparently. The reflection on the window takes away from the image. I don't think it adds any mystery or layers of artistry. So I wish the reflection wasn't there. Focus is also tough. The haircutter to our right is the closest out of the four. The man leaning back in the chair getting his haircut is the furthest of the four. And the focus really went on the third person and a little bit on the second, but the first and fourth are a little bit out of focus, unfortunately. And the only face we can see is the fourth one. Our eyes go there. These are all things that are really hard to handle in this situation. I'm sure the photographer did it quickly and moved on. And then the cropping, I think we could lose a good 15% off the left, and that would balance out the picture more. So I thought it was really interesting that you gave this a try. And you do have an interesting scene with intense haircutting going on.
And that's by George Papel. Looking at Osprey's movie still, East Hampton, New York, 1993.
You know, I saw that title and I assume with the movie still that this is actually an image taken from a film. In which case, and I looked at it pretty closely, if it's a single frame grabbed from a video, it's from 1993. It's really remarkably clear and quite noise-free. Technical aspects aside, it's really a great candid capture. The more I looked at it, the more I liked it. I like candid shots rather than pose shots in people. And this is just a nice candid capture of a couple of handsome young men. And I especially love the eyes on the young boy there. Really nice portrait. It actually looked to me like it could have been from a theater release type film. There's just something about it. It almost looks like it could be a capture from a cinema film. But I trust our club member that it was taken from a video that they took.
And the videographer was Shelby Cohen.
Nice.
Serious Intent.
Well, the little girl's face obviously is the winner in this picture. Your eyes just go right there, and she's so cute. The lighting is nice. It worked even though there was darkness around. The photographer was able to get enough light on her face. The camera unfortunately photographed on the metal, or focused on the metal in the foreground and not on her face. If you have more sophisticated camera, you can place the focus point over her face and then the camera will focus there. Other than the focus, the framing was well thought out. I like the cropping on this. And then the subject is just an absolute winner.
And the photographer was Kathy Triolo. Ron Portrait.
Really well done street portrait. Shows, I think, technical mastery in terms of capturing really kind of an endearing facial expression. It's a little bright up here, it didn't seem quite as blown out a little bit on the monitor at home. Really endearing facial expression, only slightly hidden by his disheveled beard and his pulled down hat. Crop wise, it feels a bit tight to me on the upper left particularly. But that crop does leave the face nicely positioned in the frame. And so I'm not sure I would change it. And I think it's well done. Thanks.
And that's by Robert Arnold. In touch with history.
I love everything about this picture. I think this came together really well. The child's playfulness in contrast with the heavy, serious machinery behind it, the black and white choice, even the pattern on the child's clothing. I was wishing there might have been a monkey in there somewhere. And it is interesting that we don't see much of the child's face, but I just really think this image succeeded so well. Nice job.
And that's by our field trip coordinator, Mike Weitzman. Britt and Gilly.
Another candid photo. It's a kind of a fun candid shot. For some reason, this had the feel of like a 1960s Kodachrome image to me. I'm not even sure why. There's something about it. The hats, especially on the little girl, really make the photo. Foreground is quite bright, even brighter so up here than it is on the monitor at home. Might want to tone that down a bit. But in some ways, that foreground does seem to work to highlight the subjects and against the bright water is behind them as well. A bit of vignetting might possibly help bring more focus on the subjects in here, and perhaps some cropping in the foreground and on the right might help as well.
And the photographer was Brad Oliver. Moving on to photojournalism.
I have to do a quick preface in this set. If you read the fine print in the website, black white's not allowed in photojournalism, and I'm the one who came up with that. And we came up with these rules during the riots in Sacramento with women wearing the pink pussy hats. And I think a disingenuous photographer could have photographed that scene and then made it black and white, and that would not have represented the women protesting as well. So that being said.
So lighten up, Douglas.
Right. This is a gorgeous image, very peaceful. The subjects are a little close to the left edge of the frame. So I like the picture as a picture. I think it's a very nice picture. And again, back to the photojournalism category, the afternoon stroll is a very gentle title. I kind of want to know, photojournalism needs a title to explain why you put the picture in. So you might want to work on that too. But the picture's great. So good job on the picture.
So that's Afternoon Stroll by Suzanne Campbell. Bra Fen, South Island, New Zealand.
Yeah, I was going to have Douglas review this one. Well, we're told it's a South Island, New Zealand, otherwise we might not know. I guess, my first impression when I saw this in the photojournalism category is similar to Douglas's comment in the previous photo, which is wondering really what the story is here. And in this photojournalism category, you prefer to have some sense of story. Maybe it says something about me, but I wondered if there's another set of photos of the depositors of said bras after they've been deposited. That would tell the story and perhaps be more of a conversation starter than the photo by itself. By the way, for you those in the back who can't read it, it says, "My boob was here" on the left and here on the right. So.
And that's by John Sievert. Rutger Hicks.
And again, a really well done photo. It's got the black and white, and this kind of makes my point. The 15s across the way are probably Mahomes jerseys, but I would be interested if those were blue or green jerseys. That would kind of make the photo more intriguing, like what's going on here. But anyway, this photographer did select the two players and the ball very well and left them in color and dropped the background to black and white, which makes it a really intriguing picture to look at, and caught a very good moment in some very quick action. So that was all well done.
And it's by Chris Schiller. Next up, Valley Baskets.
Before we go there, I need an addendum to the raw photo. I was told by the photographer, it actually was a cancer support exhibit. And that is part of the story that I wasn't aware of. So there was more to the story. So Bali baskets. Okay. Really nice image. I think it'll also fit well in the travel category because it has that sense of somewhere more exotic, somewhere different. It doesn't bother me at all that we can't see the basket dealer's head, upper body in here. I actually like it. The fact that you see the legs and it's really about the baskets. I had mixed feelings on whether the top part should be cropped down a fair amount, especially given the little window view of a mountain peak back there, which again, if it was in the travel category, probably you want to maybe keep that in, but I'm not sure it's necessary or adds anything in this category. It's really about the baskets and the basket dealer. And that being said, my last comment would be that the main subject, the baskets, are a bit overbright and slightly overblown, particularly towards the top portions of the baskets. Probably still enough, I think, detail in there that you could probably bring that down and capture the details in there. Despite that, I thought a really nice image.
And the image is by Fred Finney. Well, that was a good segue into the travel category. Salvador Dali home.
I don't have a lot to say. I like the photo. I like the framing. I like the choice composition. I like all the elements in the photo. It's a fun photo for my eyes to explore. I guess I don't have any criticisms of it. The little alcove on the right is a little darker than the rest of the picture. I might have lightened that slightly. But I just found this a very pleasant picture to explore for a little while. So I enjoyed it.
And the photographer was Craig Orson. Street performers in Mexico.
Bright colors. I've lost. Hello.
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. Bright colors, exotic outfits make this a good choice for the travel category. Nice job with the flash, well, I assume must have been flash exposure. I will say that although the performers are really the main subject here, in some ways I find the little faces in the upper left looking through the bars, particularly the little boy up there, more interesting, rather than distracting or detracting from the photo, which sometimes things like that can do. In this particular case, I found those candid faces up there more interesting than the static tourist pose of the main characters. And that sort of candid street travel shot is more to my liking. So nice image.
The photographer, Larry Lefman. Santorini, Greece.
The texture of the ocean water I love in this one. It's just a very intriguing texture. It looks like lots of little waves instead of big waves. The subject matter is challenging. I think you may have had 3 pictures here. On the right, that would have made a picture all on its own, and then the church bells in the center could have made a picture on their own, and the flag could have made its own picture. The flag is a little uncomfortably close to the left edge. All those things being said, I'm glad you took us on the travel with you and showed us this interesting view of Greece.
And this photographer was Ed Sylvester. Terracotta Glow in Tuscany.
I really, really like the treatment of this image. In an era where folks are really getting carried away with intense dehazed skies, and overly vibrant saturated colors, the soft calming shades of this photo are a refreshing change. Perfect vertical building lines funneling our eyes along the empty, peaceful road. Just a lovely travel photo. I wish I was there right now.
It was by our past photographer, Rachel Rosenthal.
Past president.
Winter Road Trip.
So this is an interesting scene. Wonder what kind of fence that is, a snow fence? I don't think it's a cattle fence.
So,
Yeah, okay. I think it's a nicely done photo. It's framed and cropped well. It doesn't give me a strong feeling of traveling though, just to give you feedback. And then, something that used to happen more in the film days when I worked in photo labs is many pictures, for what reason I couldn't quite explain, was shift slightly yellow-green, and this is one of those, that this picture was shifted back a little bit blue and a tiny bit magenta. I think you'd see the colors come back to life in a much more pleasing way than what's being presented. So I like the lines of the picture. That's my favorite part of this. It's the snow lines, the fence lines, the horizon lines, the best part.
And that was by Ingrid Lockhart. Moving to creative fantasy. Beast at Hirschman's Pond.
we've seen a number of these mirrored images in the club, and this is another effective one. From my perspective, the quote unquote beast is a little bit lost back there, since that is the main feature. In fact, I'm not sure that the pond with the ducks adds at all to the image. When I zoomed in and looked at a crop just starting at the pale shore edge above the water line and tightened on the sides as well, I found the actual beast to be much more compelling image. Worth considering, but I also understand that if you felt that the ducks add to the story, well, that's the prerogative of the photographer.
And the image was by Fred Clausens. Crossing Hope Valley.
This is a very polished photo. If you look at it closely, it's very nicely done in every little detail. I do have my own take on it, though. I think it's slightly out of balance in the composition. I would crop in from the right, probably 10%, maybe even slightly more, and then work out that boulder in the bottom. The white and red sticker in the upper left corner of the truck is, to me, distracting. It doesn't match the mood of the rest of the picture, so I would get rid of that. And with those two steps, and then reframe it with your nice matting and shadowing, I think it's a great image. Came across really well.
The photographer, the artist was Dave McClellan. Riptide.
Riptide, another clever title, and a really fun and fascinating image. I think it would have worked very well in black and white as well. Foreground textures on the dark sand and the surf rolling in on both the left side and the right really are the best part for me. But I found all the elements of this came together quite nicely. Actually, that's sort of a pun I didn't intend. That they don't really come together, but overall they come together for me.
The artist was Ellen Davis. Great Blue Heron portrait.
This is a really pretty, engaging picture. Again, I feel slightly out of balance about it because the bird is looking to our right. I would bring the left border in a little bit closer to that wingtip. That would make me feel the picture's more balanced. And with pictures like this, I actually wonder if the artist is trying to look a little more edgy or a little more pretty. And I feel like this one is somewhere in between. I would have gone more one direction or more the other. And then as far as just making it look pretty goes, the upper left is too bright for me. I would have brought some of that same nice blue texture in the upper right corner over to the top left and side left in that corner over there. That being said, it's actually a really cool image. It's a lot of work was put into this and it came out pretty well.
The artist was Frank Bloksberg. Possibilities.
Really cool, moody, atmospheric image. I know in this creative category, it's kind of an anything goes, but just as a note, I always hope that the various elements of a composite photo or image like this one were all originally taken by the photographer, the moon, the stars, the foreground, etc. I'm not familiar with whatever app it is that creates that border effect and the overall treatment on this, but I like it. And I find that it works really well with this image. So nice creation.
The artist was Eric Ingalls. Moving to manipulated but realistic. America at 75 miles per hour, Utah.
Oh, yes, the title gives us a clue. Um, This works really well. As it's in the manipulated category, maybe the sky was replaced, but it was done really well. This came together nicely. It's a nicely balanced composition. Wouldn't change a thing with that. On my calibrated monitor, I was actually going to recommend that the whites be brought up a little bit. The projector here has done that for us, and I think this is a stronger image than what I saw on my calibrated monitor. So I like it. I think this is successful. Nice job.
I think that 75 miles an hour was a tip-off, but this is by Ingrid Lockhart. Slow down, Ingrid. The hat.
I think we're starting to become familiar with this photographer's work, actually. A visually striking and clever composition done very effectively in black and white. It's tough to figure out exactly what is the manipulated part and the manipulated and realistic here, which is I find that great. Perhaps just the pure white background was part of the manipulation. If so, an interesting choice, given that the white hat is the titular subject. Surprisingly, given that bright white background and the white hat being the main subject, the great tonal range makes it work very well, and there's still plenty of contrast between the hat, the body, the pedestal, and that white background. Cool pick and very well done.
Artist was Darby Davenport.
Surprise.
Next up, Panamint Mountains.
I like what the artist was after on this one. I like the color palette, the warm, the blue. Cropping is good. This one, when I reviewed on my monitor, I had the little thumbnail next to it in open a preview and then this large picture to look at. The softness of the image, I think, is regrettable. I think it steals some of the power away from this as an art piece. And then I looked over at my little thumbnail, and the thumbnail is gorgeous. You see more clearly the light streaking down through the mountains. So something made this picture go soft and focused. And I think if you can go back and figure out where that was lost along the way and bring that back, I think this then becomes a very successful image.
And that was by Jerry Thomas. Yaquinia Lighthead Lighthouse. Did I say that right?
Yakina, I believe. Very pretty composition. Again, it's in the category of manipulated realistic, so right away I go to, was there sky replacement? And given that pretty sky, I suspect so, but that's fine in the category. However, and you can't zoom here, there's something wrong with the photo. The photographer apparently didn't notice that there's a rectangle in front of the building, in front of the lighthouse. And it's some sort of weird aberration there. Once you see it, you can't not see it, and it really greatly detracts from the photo. I'm not sure if it was intentional. I can't imagine why it would be, but it effectively, to me, detracts from an otherwise pleasing image, and certainly takes it beyond the realm of realistic, as in manipulated but realistic. It looks to me like maybe an aberration of the sky replacement or something. I'm not sure what.
The artist was Rachel Rosenthal.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Rachel, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Next category, black and white. Untitled.
This is a nice image, a nice thought out composition. I like the feeling of the balance of this picture. Even more so on my monitor, this was too high in contrast. The whites were controlled well, but the blacks sank into muddy shadow. So I would like to see a little bit more shadows in this picture brought out to look pleasing. Other than that, I didn't have too many thoughts on this one. I think your cropping is very nicely done on this nice balance to it.
The artist was Emily Weissman. High Floating Hostel.
Definitely be in the travel category as well, an exotic sort of image, nice tonal range throughout. Again, a little over bright on this, on the picture here versus the monitor at home. but pretty good range of darks to lights. Nice composition, all those leading lines taking us down what looks to be like a bamboo walkway. This might have been a phone photo or perhaps just taken at very high as ISO. But as you zoom in on it and look around, there's quite a bit of loss of clarity and detail, particularly in those bright areas on the upper left, sort of kind of resulting in some strange digital artifacts up there. That said, a fine travel and black and white photo.
And the photographer was Gary Cart-Staffner. Yuba River, 2023, excuse me.
This one was fun to see on my monitor. My eye actually went to the treetops on the left mountain. That was the most visually interesting part of the picture. And then I realized the foam in the river is blown out. Even on my darker monitor, it's still blown out. With that, the whites recovered in the river. I think you've got a gorgeous picture here. The mist above the far mountain, in front of the far mountain, adds a nice three-dimensional feeling to the picture. The cloudy sky and the trees on the right side are pretty too. I think the trees, for me, are the most engaging part of this picture. I think your composition is really good. The balance feels really good to me in this picture. So if you can just recover some river highlights, I think this is a successful image.
And that's by Hado Botha. Lobos, number 4.
Well, I have a soft spot for these kind of near abstract images as found and seen in nature. And the photographer did a great job seeing this one and capturing it. The image goes from deep black to bright white with a gradation of grays in between. Very well executed from a black and white technical standpoint. Just a hint of human forms perhaps in there if you choose to see them. I could see this one very nicely as wall art. I did look at a possible crop at the bottom. I wondered if maybe it was me wanting to see it more as an abstract and those rocks make it less so. But as I did that, I think perhaps I prefer it as it is. And more importantly, so did the photographer.
And that's by myself, Mike Shea. Heavy surf.
Yeah, some reaction from the crowd here. I love this wave. The wave is spectacular. The foreground turmoil in the water is out of focus. And I think that's great. It adds even more chaos to this picture. The cropping, the composition is awkward. I think a lot can be cropped off the left and the top, and that's probably the best cropping choice because of the way it swoops to the right border. But you might experiment with some different cropping. I even considered cropping just to that wave in the middle, but this does need some kind of cropping to improve the picture. And then I think once you have done that, that wave in the middle is just so visually engaging to look at. It's really a good photograph that you captured here.
And that's by Eric Engels. Next up, infrared study.
A fascinating, artful photo. Looks like carved marble, like it could be a marble statue. Could have worked in our assigned category this month with a bit of motion blur there. Flowing lines with a gradual change in skin tone from that bright white, which is not blown out, by the way. Again, brighter on here than it is on the monitor. Gradation from that moving from right to left towards the grayer and to the darker left side of the body. And a note, it is a nude, yes, but barely so. And in fact, I found it sort of interestingly androgynous, making it all the more intriguing. Thanks for sharing this cool black and white photo.
And that's by Daniel Chaplin. Chewy portrait.
Well, an obviously lovable picture, beautiful, cute little dog. Technically, a lot of good things are done with this picture. It's good exposure, good focus. Cropping at the bottom, it's always a little funny. I'm curious if the whole paw was available in the picture to show. Since we're not seeing it, I'll assume maybe it wasn't there. I would actually crop up slightly higher on the bottom. I think for me, that would be more comfortable. I do like seeing the bend of the dog's wrist, but I think I would bring the bottom of the frame up just a little bit. And then everything else about the picture is great. It worked.
And photographers, Robert Arnold. Frozen.
I'll let all the woos and hows die down here. Side note, when I first joined this club a few years back, really weren't monthly after monthly, a lot of high quality black and white photos, but boy, has that changed. Become a very tough category. And this is one more excellent provocative image. Very careful exposure to not blow out those incredibly bright areas where I assume it's early morning or late day sun shining in there. And the photographer has chosen to limit the amount of lightning. I mean, obviously to get that exposure right in those bright areas, the rest of it has to be a bit dark, but nowadays you could bring that up quite a bit. I believe the photographer has purposely chosen to keep the sky and the shadowed areas, in this case, rather dark, and yet there's still some detail. And I think in this case, to the betterment of the image, keeping them dark the way they are. Reminds me of the abominable snow monster in the Rudolph show. Great shot.
And that's by Darby Davenport. We got 7 more images, folks, getting there. This is the color category. Magical Morning in the Neighborhood.
Well, that's a good title for this picture. I like the blue sky and the warm sunlight on the snow and the treetops. And these pictures are always good to get before the snow is falling out of the tree. And this photographer did that well. I like the framing. I looked at whether or not I could have brought the sun a little slightly closer to the tree, but then there's another tree that would have blocked it. So I might have left slightly more room off the left border, expanded that out slightly for the balance of the picture, but it's tiny criticisms. This picture is very successful overall. I like what you did here. It's a very fresh, clean, breath of fresh air kind of photograph. Nice job.
And the photographer was Ann Westling. Next up, Power.
Appropriate title, nice capture of the power of nature. Good exposure control on those clouds. There's all different levels of brightness up in there, while maintaining interesting, nice light on the house, which not only adds a sense of scale, the house, but I think it adds an element of color and interest to take this beyond, quote, just another cloud photo, unquote. I would probably clone out that bit of white to the left of the red house. I found it somewhat distracting and certainly doesn't add to the photo and be easy to just get that out of there. Otherwise, a nice cloud study and power of nature.
And photographer, Eleni Prusa. Feather Fantasy.
The photographer found a really interesting subject here and tried to tackle it as best they could. The feathers are very visually interesting. All the lines and the tones lead the viewer's eye to this dark circle right at the bottom, and it's quite a bit at the bottom of the frame, which is a little uncomfortable. And I'm sure the photographer intended for us to look at all the feathers and the pretty patterns in the feathers, but that's not the effect it ends up having, unfortunately. I even tried putting this in Photoshop and making it into a negative, and then you dial the slider back 180 degrees in the hue, so it goes back to the natural feather colors. It's interesting to do that. So I think I would have come in a little closer and foregone the radial pattern, and then just really tried to show the patterns of the feathers.
And that's by Bernadette Sylvester. A Seat in Autumn.
It looks like no one has sat in this seat in autumn for quite a while, given the leaves and needles that are accumulated there, which actually that accumulation of material there is important to the photo, in my opinion. I like the idea of the warm autumn sun making this an inviting place to sit on a cool autumn day. I probably would have stepped back a bit to give more room to the left of this photo and the bottom where that leg is cut off, and to capture more of the overall surrounding autumn scene to put the bench in some context of the setting a bit. Lastly, the bench itself is overly bright, particularly in the front. And I think, again, if it was stepped back and it was a little more in context with the autumn colors, that would be less noticeable. And lastly, I think doing that as well and some vignetting on this one would also help.
And photographer was Patricia Leviton. Last image in the color category, Painted Ladies.
So comment about category stuff again, I'm sorry to be a stickler. Just so everybody knows, putting a border around would go in the creative category, but the tiny thing. That being said, this is quite a very carefully put together picture. It's very pleasing, nice background. The flowers are really beautiful, that beautiful color. And the photographer chose to shift them over to the right side, which is interesting. It makes it a more intriguing picture as far as balance and composition goes. The flowers are really beautiful in here if you can study them up close.
And photographer Suzanne Hamilton. So now the phone category, this is our last category, A Winter to Remember.
Yeah, this is a challenging scene with the whites and blacks, and darned if that phone sensor didn't nail it. The exposure is really nice. The feeling of composition and balance of the picture is very pleasing. It's a nice picture to explore around in and see, notice the skier tracks in the lower left that have then been snowed over, and then a couple more skiers went over it after the snow had fallen. And then the most intriguing part, of course, is the ridge mountains coming down. They're very textural. It's a good picture.
And the photographer Tom Quinn. And our last image, St. Monan's Church, Scotland.
Very pretty scene. This could easily have been a favorite in the travel category, given the strong sort of European vibe to it, UK kind of vibe, really. Wonderful colors, sort of in great contrast to the old gray and stone of the church and the severe lines on the church. That branch on the upper left, big dark branch, feels a bit confining to me, but it's obviously framing the scene, and I think it's probably framing the scene exactly as the photographer intended it to do, whether I like it or not. And also, I did notice, thinking about it, that dark limb does serve to help balance the dark right side of that flower bush, adding to the overall framing effect of the church and those bright, beautiful flowers in the foreground. Really good phone pic of a classic coastal UK church.
And the photographer was Craig Orson. And so that was the last image of the night. But before you go, we've got one more announcement to make. I'm going to make one, and then David's going to make one. So just keep in mind, next meeting, no Zoom option, in-person meeting only. And I'd like to thank Douglas and Tom for doing the critiques. Thank you, guys.